Okay, here's the third video that will hopefully help you study for tests and quizzes and all those different things coming up. This one, as you can see, is called the Reformation. I'm going to try to cover everything from the Reformation, the Counter-Reformation, the situation before the Reformation, and the situation after. So in about 10 minutes here, I hope to do about a week and a half worth of stuff. All right. So this next slide right here gives you the very, very basic information, just a simple starting point. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on it, but you should be able to define Reformation, and the key word is obviously reform. All right. The Reformation is reforming the Catholic Church. So this is just a list of people to know. You should know that these three are all Catholics. And then these guys here would be your reformers, known as Protestants. One thing to remember is they're called Protestants first, meaning they're protesting against what the Catholic Church had been teaching. And the actual religions don't get the names, Lutheranism and Calvinism and stuff like that until later on. So Luther doesn't start Lutheranism. Luther starts what's called the Protestant faith, and then eventually it's labeled specifically as Lutheranism. A big thing you need to do on your own is review the books of these people. Review the books, review the writings. I'm not going to be able to go over all of them. We did go over many of them over the course of the different lessons in class and stuff like that, but you've got to spend time on those things. Those are easy questions to make up. So on your own, go back and look at all the different books that Luther, Calvin, and other people wrote. All right. Also, the last part of the basics here, as we go through this thing, check out the backgrounds of the slides. There's two different types of backgrounds. Let's see if you can tell the two apart. All right, so the next topic here, or the first big topic, is going to be prior to Luther, prior to the 95 Thesis. And hopefully you remember the 95 Thesis is October 31st of 1517. And this is all positives. Everything here is good. The Catholic Church was still a good thing for lots of people. All right, it's left over from the Middle Ages. It offered hope and optimism in that dark time, that 900 years of the Middle Ages. And by the time we get to the Renaissance and Reformation here, before the 95 Thesis, it is a positive thing. List of different things that we went over. People were very involved. Still liked the church, still went to church. The church controlled or influenced a lot of different things like festivals and All Saints Days, things like that. So the church is a very big part of people's lives. This is also a positive. All right, Thomas Kempis. The book is Imitation of Christ. So once again, back to the last slide, the different books you need to remember. So a good question. I just thought of this while I was making this. Hopefully I'll remember to do it. Compare Thomas Kempis to Ignatius Loyola, a counter-reformation guy. Would they have gotten along? Did they do the same kind of thing? So this slide is simply, the first thing we talked about was simply the good that the church had going for it, the positives. People were excited, people were happy. It was still very, very popular. But obviously, not everything was so good. All right, not everything was so good. And the biggest problem was pluralism. Pluralism led to absenteeism, absenteeism led to corruption, and absenteeism led to the lack of education and the morals. So I tried to tell little stories about the drinking monk visiting the prostitute, the lack of education, the Latin. Remember, the church services were in Latin, and you were starting to get monks, or not monks, but priests that couldn't speak Latin. And remember, the biggest part of all of this is saving souls. Souls. Getting to heaven. Life on earth is brutal. Let's try to get to a positive afterlife afterwards. So if you go back to the positive slide, the previous slide, one thing to kind of summarize it all is people still thought the Catholic Church was going to get them to heaven. But you still had these negatives. Okay, you had these negatives, and these negatives are leading to, or going to lead to, the Reformation. Also, if I go back a slide here for a second, remember that the Catholics were aware of some of the problems that they had. They did launch their own Reformation. They did do their own reforms before Luther did anything. But obviously they weren't very effective because we're still going to get Luther. So this was the good, this was the bad, and then there's indulgences. All right, the guy on the left over here is Johann Tetzel. The coin from the coffer rings, your soul from purgatory springs. He is the guy that comes up with this sales pitch. He's the guy that comes up with the idea of how to sell indulgences. He does not come up with indulgences. He just comes up with the idea of selling indulgences. And Martin Luther's the guy of the Reformation that starts it, but indulgences are the topic that inspires him to do what he did. And you can see the little picture right here. This is him nailing the 95 Thesis, the issues that he has with the church, beginning with indulgences. So you should review indulgences. Remember, the Catholics were teaching, and they were the only church at the time, that once you died, your soul went to purgatory. And purgatory was a terrible, terrible place. But the good news was when you were done with purgatory, you ended up in heaven. Indulgences would shorten that time. All right, so the positive spin was supposed to be shorten your time in purgatory. You end up buying them for other relatives to shorten their time in purgatory, and then you buy them in advance for bad things that you're going to do to shorten your time in purgatory again. The reason they were selling them, the reason that Tetzel over here on the left was so important is because he's generating lots of income. Pope Leo X was building St. Peter's Basilica, and he needed lots of money to do that. And the quickest fix was to sell indulgences because people bought them and people liked them. So they had the good, you got the bad, and then you got indulgences. And indulgences are what Martin Luther explores. Remember, real quick, remember the disobeying his father, almost getting hit by lightning. Is he doing the right thing by becoming a monk? He's in Erfurt where there's lots of religious people, but lots of drinking and there's prostitution. He sees his friends die. Remember, all of that stuff makes him who he is. He becomes a monk and he's torn. Am I doing the right thing? Am I doing the wrong thing? He throws himself into the Catholic Church. He reads the Bible and he says, I don't find indulgences. So his goal up here was always to save souls. And what he wanted to do with his 95 Thesis in 1517 was reform, that's an R in here, the Catholic Church. He was a Catholic. He was a committed Catholic. He has no desire to change the Catholic Church. That's what he wanted to do. Remember, it won't be till years later, decade or more later, where he basically then says, fine, okay, new church, new religion, Protestant religion, here's what we believe. And remember, the Confession of Augsburg, 1530, is going to be why he or where he, I should say, maps out Lutheranism. It's not till 1530. He'd written a number of books in between: Against the Thieving Murderous Hordes, Admonition of Peace, On Christian Liberty. On Christian Liberty is a big one. Remember, On Christian Liberty, you got the flashing little message there on the bottom. Watch this. I'll make it go again. There we go. And I also circled something in the upper right-hand corner to see if you can catch my little point with that. But remember, his goal was to save the Catholic Church, not to create a new religion. That won't happen for a long time. And what's the result? Well, the result will be a new religion. But as I just said, maybe 10 years later, okay, 1530 for sure, Confession of Augsburg, and I know that's 13 years later, but just kind of review him, review his books, review what he ultimately was trying to accomplish. He will inspire a whole bunch of new Reformed religions. And this map over here I liked. I thought this map was a good map. It really showed you how these religions end up breaking down, the different parts of it. And it's got the Muslims on there. It's got everything on there. It's all a part of the Reformation. All right. Remember, Calvin predestination. That's going to be the greenish area over here. This is Switzerland, little pockets here and there. This is John Knox. Okay, remember John Knox goes to Scotland. Zwingli, he's just a reformer. He's very much like Luther. Okay, only he doesn't come up with new religions, or I should say a new religion. And then remember the Anabaptists. The big thing for the Anabaptists was to baptize as adults. But you need to remember more importantly, that they were separation of church and state people. So what was their reform? Baptize as an adult. What made them radical was separation of church and state. And obviously, I'm just going very quickly. I'm just trying to remind you of a few things. Check out the map, review all this kind of stuff. The last thing to remember is salvation by faith alone. And I could have talked about this with indulgences, I guess, but Luther's going to teach salvation or getting to heaven, your soul being saved, is only by faith. And indulgences were an example of works, how you work and believe to get to heaven. And Luther's going to say that's not true. So remember that part of it. The ultimate issue, and this is how questions have been worded in the past, the ultimate issue when it comes to Luther is how are you saved? And his point is salvation by faith alone. And then lastly, we had the old Anglican Church. Everybody, or a lot of people are interested in his wives. It's kind of like the art. When you say you're talking about Renaissance, people will talk about art because that's what smart people know. People say, and you say Henry VIII, people want to talk about his wives because that's what people know. Well, you should know that his wives really aren't that important. Okay? Yes, they play a role in creating the Anglican Church, the Church of England. But really, remember the three-step promise. It's the appeals law, and then it's the oath, and then it's supremacy. Those are the three acts that he passes. And when you get to this one in 1534, he's the guy head of the Catholic Church, which is now called the Anglican Church. There are no new beliefs. This one has nothing, I'll do this way, nothing to do with doctrine. No, Ghostbusters, get rid of it, whatever you want to say. Luther had doctrine. Anabaptists and Calvin all had doctrine. Anglican Church doesn't have doctrine. The wives are important only in terms of the three kids and who their moms are and how they will rule in the future. So the wives for our next test aren't really important. Henry wanting to get a divorce or get his marriage annulled is important because that's why he creates the Anglican Church. All right. Last thing we have there, though, is the Catholics aren't going to give up. These are the four big R's. You should review these. You should remember these. You should remember that the reaffirming of the faith will turn out to be a success. All right. Recruiting new missionaries will turn out to be a huge success. I put the exclamation mark there. I find the Jesuits very, very interesting. And reforming of the Catholic Church will also be a success. The big thing to remember for reform is ending pluralism. This is all right here, the Council of Trent. So I don't know if I stressed this enough when we talked about it. I forgot to do it in first and second hour, and then I kind of did it the next day. But ending pluralism, as I said a few slides ago, is going to end all the other problems. And so that's a big success. Reconciliation with the Protestants will be a failure. That will never happen. That will not get done. So you should review the Council of Trent. You should review the Jesuits. You should review these four R's. You should understand why they're a success, why they're a failure. And then the final slide has to do with the religious wars. These are the places. We'll talk about the French. We did that already. That would be the St. Bartholomew's Day Massacre, the War of Three Henrys, Henry of Navarre, who becomes Henry IV, who fought Henry Guise, who also fought Henry III, who was the son of Henry II, and I intentionally said all the Henrys just to confuse you. This is something we haven't talked about as of the making of this video. We will do that Friday, and this is kind of the end. Remember this as the end of religious fighting. Okay, this is it. When this war ends in 1648, the monarchs of Europe are basically going to say, that's enough. This is stupid. This has been dumb. This has been a problem. We're not going to do it anymore. So this decades, plural up here, of religious fighting, I'd say 1520s. You got the peasant revolts of 1525. The Edict of Nantes in 1598 ends it in France. And the 30 Years' War ends it in 1648. So overall, you're looking at, 125 years of people killing each other in the name of religion. And then lastly, I just thought this was a good quote. We're not talking about Napoleon. He's irrelevant to our time period, but I thought this was kind of a good little way to end the Reformation video. So give you a few seconds to read that. Thought it was kind of funny. Once again, this is kind of quick, but hopefully at least gives you things to be studying. All right, good.